r/Nosleep. Posted by you/Mr_Nobody_author. If you see a knockoff DcMonalds in the middle of nowhere, do not order the chicken fillet. Like the title says, if you stumble across a knockoff DcMonalds in the middle of nowhere, and by this, I mean the state of Ohio, do not order the chicken fillet under any circumstances. I guess I should explain why though, and to tell you that I will need to tell you the story of the events that led up to me making this post. We had been driving through rural Ohio for close to half a day now, and by we I mean myself and my best friend Sophia, and it might as well have been the middle of nowhere for the lack of other cars we saw. As a result, you can imagine our surprise when we stumbled upon what appeared to be a fast food location by the side of the road. By this point we were both quite hungry, so without questioning exactly why there was a fast food joint on the roadside, we began to pull in. It was at this point we read the sign closely and realized that it didn't seem to be any existing brand, instead mirroring the looks of a well-known one, except with the slightly changed name of DcMonalds. This should have been a pretty big red flag, but we were hungry enough that we did not give it a second thought. As we pulled in we noticed there were not any other cars in the parking lot, however seeing how few cars we had seen all together on this long stretch of road it was nothing to be surprised by. In retrospect, going in I should have paid more attention to the fact that all the promotional posters and advertisements seemed to date back from the 1980s at earliest. However, as I said before I was quite hungry and wanted nothing more than a bite to eat so I ignored yet another obvious red flag. Another thing I should have noticed is that none of the staff were smiling. They were not grimacing or anything, just none had smiles on their faces. However, I simply assumed that anyone who had to work in a place this remote wouldn't exactly be happy. Me and Sophia both read the menu while deciding what we wanted to order, and I settled on the chicken fillet, a decision I would later come to regret. Sophia meanwhile settled on a big burger. Once again, the fact the names on the menu avoided any well-known brands should have been yet another big giveaway that something was amiss, but we paid no attention to it. After deciding what we wanted to buy, we headed up to the counter to order. Sophia ordered first, the person at the register nonchalantly recording her order down. However, when I came to give her my order, a grimace appeared on her face. She froze and did not say anything for a few seconds, before I said my order once again, thinking she may have simply misheard me. "I heard you the first time. We don't have any available at the moment, but if you want you can come with me out back to see if we have any there." I must admit I was a bit creeped out, but I don't think you understand just how much I wanted this chicken fillet, so I pushed all the red flags to the back of my mind. Sophia, however, must have started to realize something felt off about this whole place, so she said she would go with me out back also. I wonder how the outcome would have differed if she had not volunteered to go out back with me, although it's best not to dwell on these things. The person at the register paused for a second, her face turning into a scowl at what she said, before begrudgingly saying that was acceptable and moving to open the door. As we both followed her out back, my thoughts slowly shifted away from the chicken fillet long enough to notice something was amiss, but not before someone else had appeared behind us. I heard Sophia begin to shout for help, but it was quickly muffled. As I quickly turned to see what was going on, a large sack was forced down onto my head, and then moments later everything went black. When I awoke after what seemed to be hours, although later checking my watch it must have only been a few minutes, the sack was still over my head. I attempted to remove it, at which point I discovered my hands were bound, seemingly by a thick rope. I attempted to cry for help, but it was muffled due to a gag that had seemingly been stuffed in my mouth. I began to hear similar muffled cries for help as Sophia began to awaken. With my limited mobility I began to attempt to feel around for a way to escape. I must have fumbled round in the dark for a few minutes before I knocked something to the floor. By the sound it made it seem to be metallic. I moved to grasp what I had dislodged, when I recoiled in pain, able to feel blood flowing out of a cut on my hand. This time taking care not to cut myself on what appeared to be a knife, I began to carefully slice away at my restraints. After a few minutes, my hands were free, although I had sliced my wrist open as the ropes came off. I let out a muffled cry of pain, attempting to not draw any attention. I quickly removed the sack over my head, followed by my gag. Glancing around, I saw Sophia beside me struggling at her restraints, although with nothing around she could use to free herself similar to how I did so. As I went to free her however, I caught a glimpse of the freezer. Through the little window on the outside of the freezer I could see inside of it, and I am still haunted by what I saw. Human carcasses hanging from hooks, gutted like pigs. I froze with terror, realizing what the food here was actually made from, and why it was such a mistake to order the fish fillet. In the moments that followed, it would transpire just how colossal of a mistake my actions just now were. While still frozen in place, grasping the gravity of the situation we were now in, I began to hear sounds from the doorway. I quickly turned to face the doorway and realized that any second now someone would come through that door. I regret what I did next. Adrenaline kicked in, and flight prevailed over flight. I sprinted the fuck out of there, knife still in hand, leaving Sophia to whatever horrible fate they had in store for her. I still hear her muffled cries for help as I seemingly left her to die in my nightmares. As I ran outside of the building, I could hear a commotion behind me, the sound of footsteps coming after me. I quickly got into my car and scrambled to get the keys out of my pocket. As soon as I inserted them into the engine, it quickly roared into life as I made my escape. As I fled down the highway, I looked back behind me to see a group of employees, about 4 or 5 in number, although I could be mistaken, standing in the parking lot, simply staring at me. The police officer I spoke to did not believe me. It was obvious he considered driving such a long distance a waste of time, and the fact I probably sounded like a mad woman with the way I described the events that transpired not helping my case. When I pushed him further, he implied that if I persisted in saying someone else had been with me in the car, then I would be tried for their murder since I would be the prime suspect for their disappearance. I dropped the subject at that, knowing the police would be of no help. This all happened around a week ago. I haven't answered my phone or spoke to many people since the incident with the officer. I was a coward. I could have saved her, but instead I ran for my life and doomed her to a terrible fate. Every night I've been having the same nightmare, over and over. The capture, the escape, and the muffled cries for help of my friend I let die as I dropped my knife while fleeing like a coward. I cannot go on like this. I just don't know what to do. Should I go back and attempt to rescue Sophia? Or is it already too late and she is already dead? One thing is for certain though. If you find yourself driving through the middle of nowhere and come across a knockoff DcMonalds, do not order the chicken fillet or you may suffer a terrible fate. As it would turn out, this would not be the last time that I visited DcMonalds. On my last post some of you recommended I go back but bring some friends with me this time. I didn't do this because, to be honest, I played my part in Sophia's death, just as the employees played theirs. I refused to drag any innocent people into this. If anyone else had to die, it needed to be me. I couldn't have the blood of anyone else on my hands. However, the fact you are reading this now means I did survive, so in a sense it was a risk worth taking. I have no idea what would have happened if anyone else had come with me, and in a sense, I don't want to know. Also, I'm sorry but I won't be revealing where this location is, or even what part of Ohio it is in, which will inevitably disappoint some of you readers. Like I said in the comments of my previous post, I do not want to take the chance of someone foolish going there and getting themselves killed. It's easy enough to avoid the place if you see it without knowing exactly where it is. I hope you understand where I am coming from on this. I just don't want the blood of anyone else on my hands, the death of others on my conscience. Okay, now on to the story of the events that transpired when I returned. Also, just to clarify a point I don't think I explained properly last time, all the other meat-based products on the menu apart from the chicken fillet were beef, so I thought it was safe to assume that is what the people who got captured were turned into, and they never had any chicken fillet, choosing to kidnap and kill those who ordered it, although in retrospect I realized it was likely they didn't just limit themselves to choosing people only if they order the chicken fillet, since otherwise the freezer wouldn't have been nearly as full as it was. Ever since the events that transpired at DcMonalds I have been nothing short of a wreck. Plagued with self-hate and doubt, being constantly twitchy, jumping at every shadow. I've spent most nights crying to myself, afraid to go to sleep in case the nightmares return. This is how I knew I could not go on like this. I needed to go back and get closure. I needed to go back to DcMonalds. I'm not a violent person by any means, but this time I knew I would have to come prepared. Before the incident I had managed to save up a bit of money which I used to buy a gun. I've honestly forgotten what the exact model was. I just went with the one the owner of the gun store recommended. I doubted that even if I ended up in a fight, I would be able to bring myself to use it, to take a life. It'd probably just end up running away like I did last time, like the coward I am. But with the preparations all made, I knew I had to do it now, or else I might lose my confidence and never get it back. It was now or never. I headed off, taking the same route as before. At points I was worried I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, but eventually my heart skipped a beat as it menacingly loomed into view. There it was, simply sitting by the roadside just like before. I had half expected it to not be there, that it had simply been a figment of my imagination. But no, seeing it once again made me remember all the pain and suffering this place has caused. I had no intention of ending this place for good. I doubt I could even if I wanted to. However, I could attempt to get closure, to see for myself that Sophia was truly dead. I parked a bit away, all the bravery draining from me, instantly becoming panicked. I took deep steady breaths to try and deal with the fear. After about 5 to 10 minutes of this I had finally calmed down and felt ready to go inside. I decided to park in the parking lot despite the risk of traps devised to stop my car escaping, reasoning that if I had to make a quick escape it would be best to have my car nearby. This time however, the parking lot was not empty. There was a dark blue car in it with me. I don't remember the exact brand, but it just seemed like an ordinary car. This changed everything. I had not planned for the idea that others may be inside at all. I knew I simply couldn't wait for them to leave. If the people inside ordered the chicken fillet or did something else that resulted in them being kidnapped, it would be my fault because I wouldn't have intervened. Throwing all my previous plans outside the window, I headed in. It wasn't a singular person inside, but a whole family of 4. My resolve strengthened, knowing I couldn't let them suffer the same fate as Sophia. They were seated on one of the tables, tucking into their food. They have already both ordered and received their food. I sighed with relief, the family seemingly safe for the time being. I felt sick in my stomach thinking about exactly what they were eating, but I didn't let that stop me. I was inside now, and the employees knew I was here, so I had to press onwards. My brain basically acting on autopilot, coming up with a plan on the fly since my old one had gone out the window the moment I stepped through the doors. I headed straight to the counter, and asked for the chicken fillet. Looking back, I have no fucking clue why I did what I did. I was completely out of ideas, so I just went with the first thing I thought of that would get me into the back rooms, where the freezer was. The cashier, who was seemingly the same one as before, scowled at me as I spoke. Through gritted teeth she once again told me they had none available out front, but I could come out back with her to see if they had any more. While she spoke, I noticed that her eyes were not fixated on me, but instead the family eating at one of the tables behind me. With a sinking feeling in my chest, I realized that the employees seemingly did intend to kidnap the family when an opportunity presented itself after all. It was at this point I decided that even if it seemed like I wasn't going to make it out alive, I wouldn't go down quietly, so the family might realize something was wrong and escape. I owed them that much at least, a chance at survival. As I moved to head through the door the cashier opened for me, I checked to make sure my gun was indeed still hidden by my side. I let off a sigh of relief, feeling its familiar shape through the fabric. This time as I headed through the door, I made sure to stay aware of my surroundings so I could not be snuck up on this time. My heart sunk as I heard the cashier lock the door behind me. No easy way out this time, I told myself. Every second that passed it seemed more and more likely this would be my end, that I would perish in this god-forsaken hellhole and suffer the same fate I had doomed Sophia to. In a sense it would be ironic, abandoning her to die, only to die myself in this DcMonalds after all. I slowly walked up to the freezer door, aware of the cashier behind me and other employees lurking nearby. It was obvious that they considered me trapped, so were waiting for their opportunity to strike in such a way I wouldn't scare their potential victims away. Using this fact to my advantage, I was able to safely reach the freezer door. I took a long glance all around me before taking a quick look through the small window on the freezer door. A quick look was all that was needed. At the front of the freezer was Sophia, gutted and sliced open, hanging from a hook like all the others. Words cannot describe how I felt seeing her gutted corpse there. She was dead and it was all my fault. I had betrayed her, I had ran away when I could have stayed and fought. Even if I would have gotten killed in the process, I owed her that much. I'll never forgive myself for leaving her to this fate. I wished our roles had been reversed so she had lived, and I had died, for I truly didn't deserve the gift of life after what I had done. Tears streaming down my face, I turned around, hearing faint whispers behind me. I could not see the other employees apart from the cashier, who was standing between me and the door she locked, the keys on her belt. My stomach tied itself into knots. The others were undoubtedly waiting in the other rooms and corridors in case I fled into the unknowns to try to escape. I knew that doing that would be suicide, for I would be fleeing straight into the outstretched arms of the enemy. Like I said earlier, I'm not a killer. I was foolish to try, but I at least wanted to try and get out with my hand free of even more blood. I slowly walked towards the cashier, intending to disarm her of the keys before making my escape. A right hook to my face the moment I came within range that sent me sprawling to the floor made me realize that wasn't going to work. I've never formally taken any self-defense classes, so I was seemingly at a disadvantage. A commenter on my last post had given some useful advice for if I found myself in a situation where I had to fight that could have helped give me the edge I needed. Unfortunately, The moment I hit the floor I became so focused on the present that I had no time to think back to the advice I was given. However, adrenaline is a powerful thing, and with no chance of flight this time I knew I had to fight, and fight I would. I lashed out at her legs, sending the cashier tumbling to the ground. We quickly began to fight on the ground, keeping the other down while attempting to beat them into submission. It quickly became apparent this was not a fight I could win. The cashier was faster, stronger, more agile, and seemingly more knowledgeable on how to fight. Before anyone mentions it in the comments, these were certainly not supernatural levels of ability, simply above average, and against someone as untrained as me, it was more than good enough. It was obvious that if this fight continued much longer, I would certainly be defeated and suffer the same fate as my friend I left to die. However, I still had one last trick up my sleeve I wasn't aware of. I quickly fumbled to take my gun out of my belt. The cashier immediately attempted to disarm me of it, but a surge of adrenaline allowed me to point it directly at her. I remember in the moments before I fired how her eyes widened in genuine fear, knowing that her end was about to come. The gunshot echoed and rung out through the air, and all was silent for a moment, and then the screams began. As it would later transpire, these were the screams of the family eating out front as they heard the gunshot and immediately ran for their car to escape. I quickly took the ring of keys from the belt of the now prone cashier and fumbled to insert them into the lock. As I struggled to find the right key, I could hear the sound of footsteps frantically running towards me. As soon as I opened the lock I sprinted through the door, my spirits lifting as I saw the other family getting into their car to leave. Adrenaline still racing through my body, I reached my car. I turned around to see nobody chasing me, the other employees presumably tending to the cashier I shot in a futile attempt to save her. As my car sped down the road back towards home, the adrenaline wore off. I had to pull up by the side of the road where I promptly threw up from all the stress I had been under. I don't remember much about the ride back, my head being a mess of emotions and thoughts, still trying to make sense of the events that had transpired. I guess it did help in a sense, getting the closure I wanted, even if it meant confronting a truth I wanted to deny. I played my part in Sophia's murder, just as much as the employees. The fact I wasn't the one who actually killed her does nothing to absolve me of the guilt. I still have the nightmares, same as before. The capture, the escape, and the muffled cries for help of my friend I let die as I dropped my knife while fleeing like a coward. Except sometimes it has a different resolution now. Sometimes if I fight hard enough, I pull out a gun and kill the attacker. Sophia still dies in my nightmares, just as I let her die in real life. But even if they are nightmares, they sometimes have a slightly better ending now. I will never forgive myself for what I did. I am a monster for leaving her to die, for betraying her like that. The events that took place at that fast food restaurant have left their mark on me, one that has changed me. I am a murderer twice-fold. Once for the death of Sophia, the other of the cashier. One a good person, one a bad. But that changes nothing, I am still a killer. I don't believe in any god, but I do know that if one exists then when I die he'll take my place in hell, where I belong for my crimes. I'm sorry to disappoint you if you were expecting a happy ending. The bad guys won, the good guys lost. And I still wonder which side I was truly on. I very much doubt my situation will improve. I'll probably remain a paranoid wreck racked with guilt until my last breath. Don't feel bad for me, save your pity for someone who deserves it. One final thing though, is that the DcMonalds still exists. So, if you are driving through Ohio and stumble across a knockoff fast food place in the middle of nowhere, get the fuck out of there and never look back. Don't go inside. Don't order anything. And most importantly, never order the chicken fillet.